Hello and welcome to another Developer Essentials. So this time around, we're going to be taking a look at user interfaces. So how we can create user interfaces or UI for our games, and a number of different considerations there for how we actually go about setting those up. So let's begin with, we set these up in our hierarchy here. And if we right click and go down to, we can see we have a UI entry. And we have a bunch of different options here. And so one of the things that you might notice is we have some ones that actually look very similar. So we have text, and then we have text-text mesh pro, button-text mesh pro. Any of these ones that can display text, you can see there is these text mesh pro versions of those. And you might be wondering what that is actually about and which one you should be using. So Text Mesh Pro is the ones that I would recommend using. There are two different systems for rendering text within Unity. One is the default original one. The other is one called Text Mesh Pro, which used to be a paid add-on for Unity and is now a free thing there that's integrated within Unity. And so Text Mesh Pro gives you a lot more options, a lot more control over the display of the text. It also gives you text that is much crisper and higher in detail. And if you want to go really sort of all in terms of doing cool different effects with it, with Text Mesh Pro, you can actually, with a few changes, make it that every single letter is actually its own separate bit of text that can then have physics happen to it, things like of that. We won't be looking at that in this one. That is going several steps beyond what we want to be looking at, but that is the kind of things that it allows you to do. So Text Mesh Pro is generally what I would recommend. So what we're going to start with is blocking out a user interface where we've got a bit of a heads-up display for the character. And we want to specifically have a few elements. We want to have some elements that are in our corners and have some elements there in the center of the screen as well. So what I usually do for when I'm setting out user interfaces is my starting point is generally this thing called a panel. And we can see when I'm doing user interfaces, I'm normally in the game view as well. So panels are what I generally use for grouping segments of user interface and for also blocking things out. So one of the handy things that I can do here is I could label this main HUD. And you can see we've got our panel just has an image there, and we can control things like have an actual image that it's using, and we can also change the color. We can see that there's a bit of transparency there already to it, but we can adjust and tweak that. Raycast target determines whether this is something that can be picked up by us actually clicking on it. In terms of if I had a control that was behind this being a raycast target would prevent me from clicking on it. So usually for something that's grouping and covering the entire screen, I would typically turn that off. And in this case, I don't need a source image. And color-wise, I'm going to actually get rid of all transparency on this and just have it as full color for now. It's just so that we can easily start grouping things. Because one of the things we want to look at and be able to do is we want our UI to scale depending upon our different screen resolutions, different aspect ratios, and that stuff that we're going to be taking a look at with this. So, okay, we've got our heads-up display. We want stuff in the different corners. So what I'm going to do is set up some more panels. So we might decide that, so this might be our minimap. And the minimap, I want that to be, again, I usually initially with this stuff, I make things super bright colors so I can easily tell where these different things are. So the minimap, well, that's panels default to taking up the full space they've got, and I don't actually want it to do that. I want the minimap to be anchored down in the bottom right corner. So to do that, we can see in terms of the positioning. So UI objects, they don't have a normal transform, they have a rect transform. And with these, we're working often with, we're anchoring the UI at a particular point. So if we click on this section here that currently is, we can see is set to stretch, we can choose different anchor points. So we can anchor to the top left, the middle top right. We can choose these different ones. We want it to be anchored to the top, but it stretches out to the side. So we think about how we want this to be set up. So in this case, I want this to be down in the bottom right corner. So it means I want it to be anchored to the bottom right. And what we'll notice is we can see at the moment this is showing left, top, right, bottom, which if I just quickly change those before I change the anchoring, you can see these control where those edges are positioned. So if I switch this to now be here, you can see I can control my X position and my Y position, and I control the width and the height. So this is where then pivots come in. So what I would normally do in a case like this is, as well as changing where it's anchoring, I would change the pivot point. So X, I don't want the pivot point to be in the center, which is 0.5. I want it to be at the edge, because that then means my X position is controlling how far it is from that edge. And I want to be able to do the same with the Y position as well. So if I set my Y pivot to 0, then again, my Y position is controlling how far from that edge. So that means I can then easily say, okay, well, I want a particular width and height. So maybe I want this to be 200 by 200, maybe 300 by 200. So that looks pretty good. And what we'd notice is that just stays there as I change the aspect ratio. So I can change that, and it stays exactly where I want it to be, which is cool. Now, that gives me a location where that HUD will be, and this is what I would normally do. I would block these particular things out like this, and usually with really bright colors, so I can easily sort of tell the status of things. So I then might want to set up a one that's going to be holding this might be the objectives. Actually, the objectives, I'm going to put that, so again, I want to make this a bright color. And again, I want to work out where I want to place this. And a really important consideration when you're setting up user interfaces is the user experience, the UX side of things. And when you're setting up user interfaces, in particular heads-up displays like this, you're setting up things to convey information to the user. So you want to think about where you want the player's attention to be. For example, if your game requires people to be very, very focused just in a narrow area in front of them, you want to avoid putting things like their health information that might be critical just in the far corner. Because if you're really focused in the center of the screen, you're not really paying attention to the stuff on the periphery. So think about where you want the information to be located from the context of, well, where is the player's attention going to be, and how critical is it that they need to look at this and parse the information? Are they needing to parse this information when they are, under stress, things like that? Then you need to make sure that it's conveyed really clearly and easily. So in this case, objectives, I might put this at the top. So this would be one where I would use the top anchoring, but have it stretch so it fills up either side of the screen. Or I could use the center top one, would also work, but I'm going to use the stretch one so we can see how that works. Again, adjusting pivot points, I would adjust my Y. In this case, I want the Y pivot now to be at the top. So change that. And then height, what this means is I can easily control the height. So that makes it much easier for working with. Now I might not want it taking up the full size of the screen, so okay, maybe I want to have it be 400 on either side like that, so I could display the objective information there. I reckon maybe 600 actually. Oops. 200 for that and 600 for the left. So it makes it easy for positioning things. And let's see what this does. So this does actually also still, behave, but we don't quite get as we would like for sort of the behavior. It's not as uh, nice as we might want it to be there. So this might be a case where, okay, that's maybe not ideal. Maybe we do go for in the center. So we can set a specific width, and then that way it's going to align nicely in the center all the time. So always be experimenting with the aspect ratio, things like of that when you're laying out UI, just as a way to get a sense of, okay, how well is this going to be working? So okay, that gives us a bit of blocking there. Maybe we want a final bit of UI where we want down the bottom left, which for anchoring bottom left, we just go straight to this. Again, changing the color. And again, turning off raycast target. So this time my pivot ends up being 0 and 0. Have our width set, and height might be 400. So got our different elements to the UI configured. Make sure I have raycast target off on each of these, because these are not things that are needing to be interactable. So I've got my key little bits that are set up. Get rid of the image on each one as well. So, okay, they're positioned where I want in terms of general blocking. But then, okay, I want to probably have specific things appearing in these. So this is where I would start to then add in text. So our objectives, I could go and add in UI and then text and text mesh pro. So the first time I do this, you'll see this message come up, that it's the first time and you need to import the essentials. So this is a thing you do need to do when it gives you this prompt. Make sure you import the essentials, and you'll find that it creates this text mesh pro folder in your project. There is example and extra stuff you can bring in as well if you need, but you don't need to do that. So the main HUD, I'm going to turn off this image because I don't need it anymore for testing. My text here, so my text is currently positioning in the center, which is good, and I want to control the alignment. So Text Mesh Pro gives us all these nice controls for making it then center, and we can make it vertically center as well. So that's pretty good. And the quest here could be head in, and I would usually, this wouldn't be text that the user will directly see in the game, but when I'm mocking up the UI, I always test with the longest possible version that I might have for the text, and usually making it longer again still, because one of the things you want to consider, especially on a larger game, is when you're localizing into other languages. Localizing into other languages, you need to be mindful of a few different things. One of the big things is the length of text is going to be different to say different things depending upon the language. Some languages, it will be more concise. Other languages, it will be more verbose. So you want to make sure you're not having text that's too compressed there. The other thing is if the text being too small, that can actually make it that it's hard to properly read or discern the content there. So mock up your UI with text being representative of what would be there, but making it be a bit longer so that you've got a good reference point for knowing that, yeah, the text will actually fit here and be legible. So this might be head in direction. Direction goes here, and quest action goes here. Well, that's not currently fitting because this is set to a width of 200, and it doesn't really make sense for doing that. I would normally set this to be a one where it stretches in all directions, and we can set a buffer. So we can say, okay, well, no, you can only go within 10 of the left, right, top, and bottom. The advantage that has is this panel, as I change the size of this, then the text changes automatically. So using these different anchoring options means that child objects will change their size automatically as the parent object changes size. So it makes it really easy for setting up UI that scales nicely. With this, I can change the color. So I'm going to make the text stand out a bit more. I can turn on things like auto sizing. If you're using auto sizing, you can control things like the min and max. Auto sizing can be good, but keep in mind you want to make sure you test with the different ranges there so that you know that it's working the way that you're after. You can control things like wrapping. So what happens if there's more text than can actually fit? So wrapping, when it will actually split across multiple lines like this, and we'll do that based upon usually white space. You can also control what happens if there's more than would actually fit in the entire box. So if I make sure there's too much, so this is with it set to overflow, it can expand out. If I set it to ellipsis, then it will truncate it. Masking allows you to then mask it out using additional things on top, so you can set up masks in the UI to cull sections. I can go for truncate, where it will just chop the text off. I can make it use a scroll rect, so there's other UI I would need to set up to allow this to then be scrollable. We can have different page setups where we can say, okay, well, it's page, and then we could switch between different ones. And we also have the linked option where you can then link it to another text object. So I normally just leave this on overflow, is generally the default. So okay, we've got our text set up. We can link into different fonts, which is always handy. If we bring in another font, what you'll often find is that you need to right-click on the font and then under Text Mesh Pro, create a font asset. So Text Mesh Pro, the fonts that it uses are not the same fonts that the default built-in text objects can use. With a Text Mesh Pro one, it is an asset you have to create, but as long as you've got the regular font already in the project, you can right-click on that font and tell it to go and create Text Mesh Pro font asset. So the creation of those is built in. Make sure with the UI that it's very easy with UI because of the number of objects you're creating to not be naming things appropriately. Try and avoid getting into that habit. Make sure you're naming things appropriately. So quest instructions. So yeah, always be making sure you're naming the things appropriately. It's going to make it a lot easier. So this panel down here, maybe this is my inventory display. So I want to list a couple of different things in that. So again, I would usually start out with a panel, which again, I'm going to make sure is colored appropriately. And that looks good. Except I don't want it to be that size. I want this to be aligned to the top. And with it being aligned to the top, then I want that height to be maybe, let's go for maybe 50. That seems pretty good. So this could be inventory item. And then that might have some text here, which that text defaults the color to being white, but we can switch that. We can switch over to, again, stretch. Set up some little bits of a buffer here, make this aligned to the left, but vertically centered. So this could be item name. So that looks all right. And making sure it's got a name. But then, okay, well, I'm going to have multiple inventory items here. So, okay, well, I could set up another one and then I could position that at, okay, that would be at -50 and then the next one. And so I could manually position all of those. It's not really ideal though. And I don't need to go for that approach. What I can actually do is I can go on the parent, add component, and we have these different layout groups: grid, horizontal, and vertical. So as their names kind of suggest, grid for as if you're laying things out in a regular grid where the cells are a particular size. Horizontal for if you're laying things out horizontally across the screen, and vertical for as in this case where we're stacking them vertically. So we add that in. Now, this will typically be what happens the first time you add one in, is it will just suddenly all look really, really wrong. And that's okay. What we typically then need to do is say, yep, hey, we're controlling the child width. So we're now controlling the child width. So let's see what happens now. I create another item. It's like, okay, that's all right. It's adding in those. And, you know, the spacing is going to adjust with each individual one that gets added in. So that's not too bad. And then, okay, well, we can check and see, well, what if I change some of the other options here? So let's turn off, you know, the force expand on height. And then we can see, okay, well, that's looking better. So it's not doing that in force separation. So if we wanted them to be evenly distributed, we could have the force expand on. But often we just want them to be stacked regularly. And that looks pretty good. We can enforce there to be some spacing. So we've got a little bit of a gap between each. If we wanted some padding there so that there was a buffer around, then we can easily configure that. And then now, as we add in new items, they just automatically appear organized as we need. We can change the order of these. They'll fix the order here, and we can just delete items. So it makes it really easy to keep something nicely organized. And again, it's something that as we scale is just going to work the way we want. We can check specific manual aspect ratios, which is often a good thing to be doing. So really handy. Lets us actually go and add in stuff very effectively. So that's with vertical layout groups. And that's pretty cool. We can go a little bit further and, well, I said a mini-map here. So what have I actually made a mini-map? So what I could do is first let's create some 3D objects. So this will be the ground. And the way I can do a mini-map is, and this is a very simple way of doing it, but what I do is I set up a camera. I make sure that camera is positioned at the center. And if I go to the scene view, I can take a look. So I move this camera a little bit up into the air. And then the camera, I can tilt it so that it is pointing directly down. And then usually I would set its projection to orthographic for a camera that is working as a mini-map. We're not usually using a perspective one there. And then clear flags, well, I probably want the background to always be a fixed color, so I can clear it to black. So that's pretty cool. And then I need to get the output of this. So what I can do is I can create something here called a render texture. minimap RT. What a render texture does, I'm going to rename this to minimap camera. A render texture allows you to take the output of a camera and store that in a particular texture that you can then use. So I'm going to remove the audio listener because this doesn't need that. And I just drag in my render texture. What that lets me do is this render texture will then be continually updating. So my minimap that I'm going to have here, I can add in, switch back to game view for this. I can go add in and under UI. So image we use with sprites, whereas raw image we use with textures. So this would be minimap display. And then I can link this up to the texture. Now, at the moment, it doesn't look like anything's actually changed, but what we can do is if I set up some materials here, so let's create a material for our ground. So this is our ground material. And then I will just change this and we can see it is actually changing. And that's because my minimap is it's taking the output from that camera and putting it into this texture. Often with a minimap one, I would change it to be an unlit color one as well, so it's not getting any lighting on it. Now I could have a version of the ground that is just used by the minimap. That would be an option as well. For now, I'm going to leave it using the standard one, and we will have more of a look at things like render textures in another video. But for now, I just wanted to use this as a really quick way of setting up that little display. Because then that's looking pretty good. Now again, we want to test, okay, well, if we change size, that looks all right. And let's adjust this so that it's filling the area. So again, it's filling the area, but we might want it to preserve the aspect ratio. So that's probably something where we would normally go for having it centered or making the parent one an actual square shape. So I'm going to make the height that. And then, so we've got a minimap. And as we move things around on the ground here, they will update in the minimap. You can just see it's a really simple way of working with that. Allows us to create stuff like that in the game very easily. And we could be overlaying on top of this. We could have different camera controls to be able to interact with that. We could also be doing things there where what we're doing is putting a little bit of a border, a frame around this would be an easy thing to be setting up there as well. So okay, we've done a lot of things where we can display information. What about things where we are having action happen? So we click on something and then it does a particular thing. So that's a common thing that we would often want as well. So let's set up another UI for, in this case, it's going to be in the top right corner. And what this one is going to do is this one is going to be used to allow us to have just a couple of controls for doing particular things. Have it like that. Again, getting rid of the background, and again, raycast tiger off. So this is going to be controls. So here, I can come in under UI. This is where I'd be using button text mesh pro. So this would be, with the buttons, you'll have two parts to it. The main button part, where we can control a bunch of the visuals, where we can react to it being clicked on, and then the actual text for the button. So we might want a few different buttons here. This might be a bunch of different ones that we want to have. So this is something where the vertical layout group comes in handy again. So we again chuck in a vertical layout group. We want it to expand the width, but we don't want it to override the height. And we'll notice the only thing we can then actually change here is the height. So the layout groups will, on the children objects, actually lock out a bunch of these settings in many cases. But this means we can customize the size here of everything a bit, just to get it appearing the way we want. We can set up a couple of more buttons. Spacing and everything there looks pretty good. So we might have ones here for, menu, for might be audio. We might also have a help menu. And actually maybe that'll be main menu, settings, and exit. Then to customize the actual text that gets shown for these, we have to update this text TMP one. So this is main menu, settings, help, and finally exit. Okay, we can have those set up. We want to actually have these do something. We want to have some reactions happening there. So let's set up our scripts folder. So there's different ways we can go about setting up the scripting logic for this stuff. And it's down to this particular scenario. So I would often, in most cases, have a main menu. Actually, main menu is not the best name for this. I'm going to get rid of that. So I could have a script that is a main HUD script, essentially, that controls every UI. This so a more monolithic one that's controlling everything there. I would normally go instead for having a script for each sort of section of the UI. So in this case, I would have, say, a controls UI. I would then also have things like a minimap UI or objectives UI. So having those split up as separate things, we can go even finer grained. So we could have a script that's just for handling the main menu button, a script for just handling the settings button. We can go really fine grained like that if we need to. It's just down to how we want to actually set this up. So I've got my control script there because we want to see how it works in terms of us getting input here. So we need to make sure the functions are public. So on main menu, debug log, main menu. We could have a on settings. Log of settings. And I won't hook up all of them. And that's something where if you want to come along and then as additional things to try and to practice, that's a good thing to be doing. So how I connect these up is I select the button. You'll see it's got on click here. So I click on the plus. Then whichever object has the script that's going to be handling this, in this case controls, I drag that over. Then under where it says no function, I want to find the name of the script. And I'm looking for my function. So in this case, on main menu. With settings, I do the same. Click plus, drag controls over, and then I say controls and on settings. So we are linking, we're binding the on-click event to the particular logic here. Let's set up one where it also changes that quest text. So what I'm going to do is objectives UI and public void on change objectives text. And then what this is going to do is we want to actually be able to change the text that's being displayed. So what I need to do is I need to add in, allows us to easily access text mesh pro, because then I can set up here, so I'm using serialized field because nothing outside of this class needs to touch this. And then, so I have text mesh pro UGUI is the one that I want for this. So that objectives text, and then I would be able to come down here and say, okay, well, objectives text dot text has been changed. So then in terms of how I link this up, if I go to my objectives, this is where I want to attach this script onto. So I've got that. I can link it to the text. So what I do is I drag the text over and link to it. And then I want something to be running that function to change it. So I might go for help. So again, I add in the onClick. Now in this case, I want the objectives one to handle it, not controls. So I drag objectives down. Under functions, I'm looking for objectives UI and then on change text. So let's watch what happens. I should be able to run this and then select different ones. So main menu, I get the text. Settings, I get the text out. Help, changes the text here. So, okay, we can pick up on things being clicked on and we can react based upon that. We can change the text of stuff, which is handy. With these text, these things support a limited level of markup. So it means I can do things like use HTML style tags to change things like bold, italics. We can change the font size, we can change the color, so we can adjust things like that at any point in the text here, which is super handy. Gives us a lot more control over how our text looks there for the project. And we could do that in code as well. So I could change like this. And if I wanted to also chuck in italics as well, because why not? And I can. So these can go in stuff that we're setting in code as well. It makes it really handy in that regard for being able to update things. So we run it, we can see those tags are coming through, which is great. So, okay, we can block out sections of our UI. We can pick up on things being clicked on, and we can update text, things like that. We do have a lot of other different types of UI. So we saw under UI, there is a lot of extra ones that we've got here. We have things like toggles, so being able to have a box that can be turned off and on. So if I set up another section of UI, where I'm going to just create another panel. In this case, I'm going to center it in the screen and make it 400 by 400. And then inside that, let's chuck in a couple of these particular ones. So let's chuck in a toggle. So one of the things with toggles that you'll notice is there isn't a Text Mesh Pro version of them, even though it has text in it. So you might need to manually convert those over to a Text Mesh Pro one. We also, under UI, we have these sliders, which these we can control the direction. So lets you set up ones where you've got vertical or horizontal ones and the direction they go in. You can control the min and max values. So you could say if it goes 0 to 1, then it will be able to do decimal values. Can also do whole numbers, where it could go from 0 to 100, for example. So that works really nicely. If we don't have whole numbers, then we can have those fractional components. So really handy for being able to work with those. But let's have a look at how we actually get output from them. So this is again going to be something where what I'm going to set up is another vertical layout group where overriding the width but not controlling the height. And we'll set up some spacing there for these just so they are a little bit nicer. Now, because these things aren't scaling really with the well, their default size is quite small, that can make it really hard to read. And one of the things with the canvases is we want to consider the size. So constant pixel size is one option, and it is the default one. I would actually recommend having scale with screen size as your option. So constant pixel size can mean that between different screens, the visuals, they will actually be quite a different size. So I usually use scale with screen size, which initially is going to do that because it defaults to really low. So scale with screen size, you give it a reference resolution. So I would normally do this. So I design the UI at a particular resolution, and then usually have it trying to do a balance between matching width and height, because this way it will then, we notice, before the UI would fold and collapse in on itself, but now it actually scales with our screen size, and it can scale up or down with that. So scale with screen size would be my recommendation. I usually design for 1920 by 1080. That way then I find that scales up really nicely, but it also scales down well too. So scale with screen size is going to be my recommendation there. Then my toggle and things like of that, what I can do with this is make this a bit bigger. So the toggle's quite small, and I can adjust the background here because the toggle defaults to these sort of settings. So, okay, I could make this 40 and this 40. I could adjust my positioning here, and I could really sort of scale all of these. I would also have the option with this of, okay, well, it might work better if I want it to be a bit more flexible. I can switch this to being one that's left aligned and is just scaling with the size. So I might say that maybe that uses 5 and 5, and that's a bit better. That fits much nicer. The check mark, again, also would need to be scaled up. So again, that would be one where just adjust all of these settings. Probably actually just a 0 for these will scale it up nicely enough. And then the text, I would again use a left align and stretch option there. Actually, I could use, no, its original one of the default stretch would be fine. What I would do in that case, though, is I would be typically changing the text, so it doesn't have an automatic thing for the text. So I'd actually probably delete that, and then I would chuck in a Text Mesh Pro text. So this is just the label. Change the color and change the positioning here just so that it works a little bit nicer. And then that will scale nicely with our screen sizes, things like of that. So that looks better for the toggle. And then our slider, we can change the height of that, and it will actually scale up. So the slider does have some scaling options there, and we can customize things like the background. We can customize things like how they get filled in. So really handy with those. If we want to see how these actually work, so input controls, I'm also going to add in a final one, which is under UI and input field. This lets people freely enter in text. You can customize the text that appears there. You see where it's saying enter text? That is the placeholder text. So that's where if you please enter your, whatever info that you wanted to have. So, maybe it was, please enter your character's starting money. So you can enter stuff like that. So it has the placeholder one there. So really handy set of ones here that we can customize the appearance of. In terms of how these work, what we get input-wise, let's take a look at that. So input controls UI. And because we're working with TextMesh Pro, we are going to need to add in using TM Pro. So first thing is being able to link up to these, because we want to also be able to control these. So serialize field. So we also have using Unity engine.ui, because we can do, one of the ones is a toggle. So demo toggle. We also have our slider there. So we have slider, demo slider. Now the input field, there is a built-in input field one, not tree editor, serialize field. We want to use the TextMesh Pro input field. So if we just put in input field, we can see TMP input field. So one of the common things is we might want to actually set the values of these. So demo toggle. And if we go for set, we actually have a couple of ways of setting each of these. So we could directly set is on. So for toggles, is on is a way of directly setting it. And that though, if we look at our toggle, it has a thing for if a value's changed. So if we just set is on, then these notifications happen, which we might not necessarily want. That might not be the behavior that we want, that we're setting an initial value for that, and then it goes and runs the logic we would when the user clicks on it. So all of the UI things also have these set is on without notify options. So untick the toggle, but do not run the onChanged event. Let's see, it has the on value changed. And let's link up its on value changed one. So public void on demo toggle changed to new value. Toggle is now, and then we can display the new value. So I usually, when I'm setting up these functions that react to stuff, I usually start them as being on, and then whatever the particular action is that's happening, just as a way of clearly sort of indicating. That's, again, it's not a required thing. It is a personal preference that I find makes it easy for me to tell what's happening. So I'm going to link up my script here. So first thing is that script needs my toggle, needs the slider, and it needs the input field. Then under the toggle, when that value has changed, again, I want to link it to input controls. And then under no function, I'm looking for input controls. And what I'm looking for in this case, because you can see here it takes a parameter, I'm looking for ones that are dynamic. So they'll be listed at the top. There's a very thin line that you can see, but they're listed under these dynamic ones, not the static ones. And I want to then select the on demo toggle changed. Because if I run this, I should see this starts with this unticked, which it does. And then if I watch the console, then whenever I change this, it's updating. So that's the behavior that I'm looking for with this. The slider, I can do a similar thing. It has an on value change and it gets a float. So public void on demo slider change. Float new value. Debug log. Slider is now new value. And then here I could be saying, okay, well, my demo slider, and again, set value without notify. I want to pick a random value in its range. So I could say demo slider min, demo slider max. Randomize the slider value. So then running this, what we should see is it will change, but it will not actually run the logic initially saying, yes, it's now this value. But when I drag this, still not getting the message because you always need to remember and link the stuff up. So again, link over to input controls. Again, because it's passing through information, I'm looking for the dynamic ones. So on demo slider changed. And then now I can run it and I will find as I move this, the values come through. So really handy for being able to get that input. And then finally, the input field one. Well, we've already seen that I can change the text in those because we saw that with the objective text there, but I can do a similar thing here. Set the input text. This is if I wanted to. So demo input field, again, we typically have set text without notify. So what I'm going to do is demo slider value to string. So take whatever the demo slider's value is and make that the input text entry. But we'll be able to see our input field ones do have options here for, now we do have a few more different ones in terms of, because there is a lot more stuff we could be doing there in terms of selecting blocks of the text, stuff like that. I'm just going to go for linking up to on value changed. So we'll have set up here, void on demo input field changed, string new value, debug log, input field is now new value. So let's link this up. And the linking up is the easiest thing to forget. So we need to, it's always just good to get in the habit of immediately go and update it. So again, we're always looking for the dynamic one because it has to be there, and you can see it's in the static version as well, but we want the dynamic version so that that parameter feeds through. So let's test. Let's see what happens. This should have a random value, which it does. And as we change it, we get through the actual text, and including at the moment it's empty, and just deleting will even put up, I think. So essentially anytime there's any change, more accurately, anytime there's sort of text input in here or something that would have conceivably an impact, it will display that message. And that text is pretty small, so we can also adjust the size of that if we want. So we can adjust the placeholder text, because that's pretty small. So that's a bit of a better size. And then we could maybe have that. That works pretty well. And then we would want to, typically our placeholder and our actual text entry will be the same size. But Really handy way of being able to work with this stuff. So we've seen we can lay out our user interfaces. When we're laying out our user interfaces, couple of key things. We generally, with the canvas sizing, I recommend setting the canvas scaler to scale with screen size and then picking a target resolution is usually my recommendation there, because then it scales up and down really nicely. When we're laying out the user interface, we use panels as a way of grouping and segmenting our sections of UI. When we're doing like of that, we can then do additional things where to organize stuff. We can use stuff like layout groups. So like a vertical layout group, or we have horizontal or grid-based ones that what they will do is organize our ones. They'll make sure that there's a consistent spacing there without us having to hard code it. When we're placing things otherwise, we make use of our anchors so that we can easily control where something appears in the scene. When we're working with adding in controls, we have regular versions and in some cases TextMesh Pro versions. TextMesh Pro ones are always going to be recommended in that they are going to give you far crisper, cleaner looking text, and they also allow you to do more sophisticated text effects if you're needing to. So I would always recommend using the TextMesh Pro versions. The thing with TextMesh Pro, as we can see, it uses its own type of font asset. It can't just use a regular font, but it has support for if we've imported a regular font, we could select it, we can go to create, and then in the TextMesh Pro, we can create a font asset. So it's not a hassle if we don't have an asset in a TextMesh Pro version, because it's already built in for us being able to actually create those versions very easily. We can control UI in code, so we can set text. We can also, when we're doing that, we can apply different formatting using tags to control things like whether it's bold, whether it's italics, the font size, the color, things like that we can easily control. We can get input from our controls, so buttons, we can pick up on them being clicked. We have controls like our toggles and sliders and input fields for getting various options, and we can react to those. When we're reacting to those, we're always linking to stuff that is under the dynamic section because there are parameters, and so that allows us to pull that information through. So with this, we can set up and organize our UIs to be able to be displaying information to the user. When we're doing that, we want to keep in mind where we want the user's focus, because we want to try and, if the user is having to really intensely focus in one particular area, we don't want to have them look out of that field of view to the far side of the screen, unless there's very specific intentional reasons for doing that. Otherwise, we want to be able to be putting information up where the user's focus currently is. So those are the key things for remembering when we're working with UI, but dive in, experiment with the stuff. See what kinds of things you can create there. And there's bits here where you could be adding on to this. So experiment with it. See the kinds of cool things that you can create with it. It's a way to really enhance your projects there as well. Thanks, folks. If you're looking for the code for the project, then in the description below, you'll find a link to the GitHub. And on the GitHub, I've got the code for this project and for all of the other projects. They're freely available. And if you have found the video helpful and you'd like to support the channel, then throwing in a like or subscribing is always a huge help. If you're looking for further ways to support, then I do have a Patreon set up, and that's going to help me keep managing to do these videos for a long time to come, which is going to help more people make cool things. And that's awesome, because that's what this is all about, is helping more people make more cool things. And that is all. Thank you.